think it is. I just can't remember if I click in the gallery view. I think it follows me with that. So I'm going to leave it here. So if you need something or you have a question, you may have to just speak up or put your hand up with the icon just so that I can see you. All right. So I've got some newspaper under here. I've got my canvas paper. You can tell it's a canvas paper if it's two colors. All the other papers are one, and it's like fabric. So canvas that's stretched is just literally this fabric, but it's wrapped around a wood frame. Could be metal frame, but that's not very common. And the white side means that it's been primed. So it has gesso, which is like a non-reabsorbing paint, right? Because you don't want the white to start coming up. That protects the canvas so the paints can't soak in. It's less essential with acrylic paint, but with oil paints, the oils can get into the canvas and kind of start to degrade it over time. So I'm going to go ahead and uncap all of my paints first. So what I gave you were the primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. And then I gave you purple, at least I intended to. There was one or two people that didn't get it on Monday. So I just must have like sorted them too fast or something. And then white and then black. Okay, because we can make all the colors out of the primary colors with white and black. The reason I gave you purple is that it's a challenging color to mix and get a pretty purple out of it. So I wanted you to have that. Now the paint that I've given you is enough to make a bunch of paintings as long as you follow the instructions and you're not globbing the paint. And so you'll have this to make other things. So if you want to paint some Christmas cards or some ornaments or anything like that, you could use this. So yes.
I got an orange, another blue, and another red.
You got orange paint in there?
Yeah, it looks.
Oh, no, that's the watercolor. That's actually yellow, though it looks orange. So those are what we're going to use next week, Karina. I was like, man, I must have been like really out of it when I made it. So we're going to save the watercolors for next week. So acrylic paints are plastic-based paint. So you have to make sure that when you clean your brush and all that, that you actually get all the paint out of the bristles, because if it dries in there, it'll dry hard as a rock and then the brush will be garbage, okay? So I'm going to start with this brush. It's a pretty cheapy brush. If you have a smoother brush, you might want to use that instead. You'll tell on my other one that I painted that I set to the side, there were a lot of like kind of line marks. And it's just because I only have so many of the big wide brushes, I couldn't give that many out. So it's a little bit scratchier. So if you have a softer brush, feel free to use it. So the biggest thing with painting with acrylics is that you have to work at a pace that the paints like aren't going to dry before they've done what you want them to do, okay? So I actually don't have a palette knife here at school. What I'm going to do is these containers should stay pure color. So I'm just using a plastic knife, but you could use the brush for this too. It just takes longer to wash it, so I was being lazy. And I grabbed a plastic knife because then it just kind of wipes off. I just made a big mess all over my hand. This is pretty much my key to fame. And I'm going to put my primary colors in the corners. And the reason I'm putting them on the tray is that I don't want to dip a dirty brush in here and contaminate my paint. You don't have to. You can also mix them right on the container, but you know, just like that, I just contaminated my white. But that's all right. So I've got that.
Miss Sil, yeah. I have some like smoother brushes. It's just they're pretty small.
Okay, so you might want to use the bigger brush, and you can kind of play with it and see how it goes.
Okay.
So you don't have to paint like a sunset kind of ombre, but I am going to show you how to blend with the acrylic paints. And I think I'm actually going to do something that's less like wide, long strokes like a sky and just more like a cool textured blended background, okay? And I'm going to show you how to do it without blending on the tray to blend on the canvas. So when I started painting and the canvas is dry, I dip my brush in the water to get it wet first because it helps me give the right amount of moisture in the paint to help it blend in thin a little bit. Then I'm going to get a little bit of paint on the end of my brush. If the paint is flying off the end of the brush, you have too much paint. So it should never be like I'm scooping it up. It should be just dipping the end. It should not be all the way up here. It's really important that it stays down here. Hey, Gavin, I'm going to leave this little note here. So we're just getting started. I'm going to leave that on the side so you can grab the supplies that you need. So I'm going to make a kind of a greenish background, and green is made with yellow and blue. So I actually grabbed blue first, but normally you want to start with your lighter color. So I'm going to switch. Because I'm going to blend them, I didn't have to wash my brush, okay? So I am going to use the tip of the brush, and so you'll notice that I'm seeing the lines of the bristles. Okay, certain brushes will eliminate that, but because I had both the blue and the yellow, first of all, it already started blending, and I used up the yellow, and I'm starting to get into this really kind of more blue concentrated. And so I haven't made a mess anywhere. I haven't flung any paint. I didn't put too much paint on my brush. So now I can go back in and I can grab some more yellow paint because my paint's right here. And this is why I tried not to paint from there. I think on Tuesday I didn't even use a palette. I was just careful to wash my brush, but that kind of got annoying after a while, which is why the palette comes in handy. So with wet blending, you're working fast and you're putting the lighter color down first because it's way too hard if you accidentally put too much dark color down. And I'm just going to make kind of a fun imaginary background. And if you accidentally grab too much paint like I just did there, I just tapped some off on my tray. They got too globby. And you don't have to use the same colors. You could make yours like a sky, like a sunset, and in which case you would start with probably some blue mixed with purple at the top.
So Mrs. L,
Yes.
I mixed the colors first, and so now it's just all the dark color because you said to do the lighter color after you said to mix the colors. So now mine's just all dark.
That's okay. So you can dab some off with your paper towel if it's too dark. Or because we should be applying it relatively thin here, you can just continue to layer it. I was thinking I wanted to do more blue, and then I was gonna take it green, and I changed my mind halfway through. Karina. Yes, Jenna.
Were we supposed to start? Because I thought we were just supposed to watch and then start.
No, I kind of want you guys to kind of paint along with me, but
okay.
I'm gonna talk first about kind of backgrounds and blending, and then we'll get more into there. So this.
And are we supposed to go from like dark to light?
So it's actually better to go from light to dark. Now,
okay.
If you are making a landscape, the sky, if you're doing blue sky, would be blue at the top and it would fade to lighter blue at the bottom. If you're doing a sunset, this is blue mixed with purple, and I blended it into the red and then down into the yellow, so I get the orange in between. This one I'm doing just more like just a cool background that I'm going to then create another kind of painting of an object or something on top of. And so I'm changing my brush stroke to create some different textures in here. And I'm changing the amount of color, and I'm putting white in some areas. I've got it really light down here. I've got it darker in some spots. So there really is no rule. Karina, if you feel like it got too dark in a spot, just put some white in that area, layer it on top. Because this is all about blending.
Miss Sue.
Yes.
Can I do like a galaxy, or does it have to be a sunset?
You can be whatever you want. So a galaxy would be totally fine, in which case you would use blue and purple and black and a little bit of red even to tint it. Jenna, do you still have a question? I'm sorry.
Sorry, my hand is...
No, that's okay. Oh, hey, Mate. Not yet. Do you want to sit and add it real quick? Is your mom waiting for you? Okay, so probably not. We can add it in the morning. It'll be ready for pickup tomorrow afternoon.
Alright.
Does that work for you? Or if
I'll have one on my phone. I'll ask you.
okay. Yeah. Sorry, we got through a bunch of stuff, but we had a bunch of students in this afternoon too. Okay. Thanks, Mate. All right, sorry guys. No, you can paint whatever you want. The secret to blending though is just using a little bit of water in your brush, and if it gets too dry and scratchy, you could put a little bit more water because it will help extend the acrylic paint. It's not contaminating your colors. It's about paying attention to the direction of your brush stroke, because whatever direction you apply the paint, it's going to look like that. So I'm purposefully making this kind of like fluffy circular texture, but that may not be what you want. You know, I don't want to just scribble it because then it looks like scribble. So there's no one way to blend. The nice thing about acrylics, oops, I shouldn't have touched it down here. If you don't like something, you just let it dry and you can paint on top of it. And we don't want to, anytime we paint, whether it's with acrylics, watercolor, tempera, glaze, we really don't want solid colors. It's just not as interesting. So even just, I'm using only 3 colors on this canvas. I use yellow, blue, and white. And I think I've got a really fun kind of mystical background. Now you will see, because this is a scratchier brush, you can see the brush strokes. If you didn't like the brush strokes, all you'd have to do is let it dry and put another layer. That would help to hide it. Because what's happening is with a stiffer brush, it's scratching, the brush is scratching against the canvas, so it's revealing the white underneath it. So I'm actually pretty satisfied with this guy right here. I think I may put a little white at the top. So the only advantage at this point of me using the tray is that I didn't have to wash my brush ever. I actually haven't washed the color off it once yet because I was blending. So I wanted them to kind of mix on my brush. If I'm going to change colors dramatically, if I'm going to go to red, I would have to wash my brush because otherwise I would start to get brown. Anybody have questions so far about how to blend? And a couple things, like Anika was also here on Monday, right? Art should be fun and it shouldn't be stressful. So there's not one way for art to turn out, okay? You may have a vision in your head and I can help you get closer to that with some of the knowledge I've accumulated over the years, but you should never get super stressed. Let it happen. Like art is all about finding your right flow. And if your brain gets stressed about it, then it's much harder to create anything kind of exciting. So if you get to this point and you get your background how you want, there's not much that you can do until it dries. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my brush in my water cup. and I'll finish washing it. To wash it, I take the brush, oops, I guess I should be under the camera, and I really rub it against the bottom of the jar so that it's like getting some agitation on the bristles, and it should come out pretty clean. And then you always test it on your paper towels. Because one, I don't want this super drippy brush on my canvas. So I got some green off. That means I need to wash it a little bit better. And you can see I did get some big drips on here, and they're actually starting to deteriorate my paint underneath there. So now I'm gonna have to go back and touch up the paint there and kind of blend that in, because that water, because the paint wasn't dry, just took it right off. Once the paint's dry, the water can't do that, but while it's still wet, it can. So I would set this to the side, and you have to let it dry. You could use a hair dryer, but you gotta make sure you don't blow it away. But it dries pretty fast on its own. If you use the paint nice and thin like this for a background like we're doing, it really shouldn't take more than about 10 or 15 minutes to be mostly dry. Now I'm gonna show you this guy, just what it would look like on this painting if I added a second layer of paint. Just so you can kind of see the soft kind of sky blending technique. So for this guy, I started with a little bit of blue on my brush. And I wanted my sky not to be plain, so I chose not to make it totally side by side. And then I took a little bit of red in here, and I started the red down lower, and then I pushed it up into the blue area, and vice versa. And so I'm really working to get those colors to kind of softly come together. But you'll see the purple that you get is a little bit dark, so I often like to put a little bit of white in there if I'm mixing purple. It's not the ugliest purple, but it's definitely a very mauve-y purple, which is not what some people are anticipating when they make their sky, if they're doing a sunset. So you can see here with the second layer of paint, it really changed how the sky starts to look, you know? If you brush too much, it will eventually start to also scrape the paint off. So you do have to kind of find the right balance. But even still, all this painting I've done, and my brush is still clean halfway down the bristles. Okay. If your brush is getting messy all the way up to here, you're using too much paint at a time. And there are artists who use really wet, flingy paint, and they like sling it all over. But that's just a different style. Or they do pour painting where they're literally pouring paint on the canvas. Those are just very different things. And usually people master kind of the basic techniques, and then they start to break the rules. Kind of how art schools have always been designed, for better or worse. Not all artists have gone to college for it. But even like back in like, you know, the time of Rembrandt, students were taught to do the same techniques, master the rules, and then they were kind of given, all right, now that you know what you're doing, now you could go out and break the rules. Felt like a color was too strong. Because it's still wet, I'm just going back in there and I'm adding some white. Now, normally I wouldn't do this and add more sky once I had the clouds stuck, because now I'm gonna have to touch up my clouds so they look like they're in front, but it's actually not bad. How are you guys feeling about your backgrounds?
I like mine, but I think it might take a while to dry.
It's okay. Just make sure you kind of have a way to keep it protected while it dries. So now I'm happy to answer any questions. And we're going to kind of work on these backgrounds for another 5 or 10 minutes, and maybe it takes you longer, and then I'll show you some detail painting techniques. Jenna.
So you can kind of see it. I kind of like this like red background, but I kind of messed up.
All right. So background happens first. And then you would go and you would let this dry. Then I like to draw with pencil next. Not all artists do. And then you would paint the next layer on there. Oops. So mine's not totally dry enough. It's actually mostly dry. It's those spots that I dripped the water that are still kind of wet. So I'm gonna show you some detail painting just on another sheet of paper. So I just Googled flowers and I found an image that I liked and I sketched it out in pencil, okay? And the thing is that in order to make this rose look anything like a rose, it's really gotta have some nice blending in it. And that's where painting gets tricky because you gotta have good control of the paint in order to get those details to look good. So this is where your palette would come in handy because the last time when I did my little alien guy, I just mixed it right on the paper. So I'm gonna make a pink rose. So pink is made from red and white, okay? So what I do to mix my colors is I grab a small amount of the white and then I grab a little bit of red and I start to mix them together. So you start with the light color first, because the dark color is so much stronger. I added like 4 times as much white and I'm still getting a pink color. Now it's not as intense as I want yet, so I'm gonna grab a little bit more red, but the red's gonna change that color really quickly. Okay, now say I ended up making it way too dark. Say this was my pink and I'm like, whoa, I wanted a pastel pink, okay? The mistake that students make is then they would come in and they would grab globs and globs and they make this whole huge pile of paint that they really don't need. So what happens if you get too crazy, just grab some paint and start a new little pile. Because once you get so much dark in there, it's really hard to get enough light in there to get it how you want. And some of the blending you're going to do right on the canvas. So if you're like, that's closer, but I still want it lighter, I just take the paint that's on my brush, and then I start a new pile, and I'm going to get a lighter color. Whereas if I just keep adding white to it, I'm going to end up using like my whole white pile just to make this tiny amount of paint. Okay, so when you mix your colors using a brush, it does get full of paint. So you'll notice I kind of twisted my brush off. Now I'm going to go in there and wash it because my paint's all the way up to this metal part. That's the ferrule of the brush. We don't want that. So I'm putting my water. I pressed it against the bottom of the cup so that way it got really clean. And I'm going to check it on my paper towel because I don't want a drippy brush or my paint gets out of control. Okay. Now, if this were a painting for real, would I paint the rose before I paint the background? Absolutely not. Because I want the rose petals to look like they're in front of the background, so you paint whatever you want to look like it's in front last. Because otherwise, sometimes it looks like it's being sucked into a vortex of sky because the sky looks like it's overlapping the rose. It's like an optical illusion. So this petal here is the one that's kind of sticking off to the side. So I'm going to start with that. But I'm going to tell you that it's not all solid pink. Because this part here this is the crevice. Ooh, I got one straight bristle. See how it's getting all over there? That happens when brushes aren't treated very nicely. So sometimes you actually have to give them a little haircut. Because otherwise that one bristle is going to drive you mad the whole time you're painting. So it's like that one little bristle, so I'm actually gonna cut it off. Otherwise it's gonna drive me crazy. So I'm starting with my dark color to make my shadow. And if the color's not pulling how you want it to, I just put a little water on my brush. And I'm gonna start to pull it out, okay? Then I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna grab my lighter color. And I still had too much dark on my brush, so I'm actually gonna go in and I'm gonna wash. I'm gonna dab it dry. I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna grab my light color. And I'm gonna start at the end of the petal, and then I'm gonna meet and blend in the middle. So I may need to come in and do some more blending here because right now it looks like there's a gap. And sometimes it's a back and forth with getting the right blend. So you're taking, to get a blend, you're taking the light color and overlapping it into your dark color, and you're taking your dark color and you're pulling it out into your light color to show the shadow here, because this petal tucks in and like under the rose here, and this is the part of the petal that's like out and catching the sun, right? So you'll notice I don't have paint all over my brush. It's only at this end of here, okay? So even though I was doing a different kind of painting, it's still not all over. I never had it where I was dripping paint all over because you lose control when you have too much. So first you learn how to paint in a controlled way, and then you can go in and you can break the rules. And I'll tell you the reason that I'm starting with the dark versus the light is because the dark is that crevice in the rose and it blends towards the outside, and it's harder to blend in and stop in a controlled way. So I can paint the paint in a controlled line here to show the shadow, and then I can blend it outwards. And that still preserves kind of this texture of the petal. And you can see there I had too much dark on my brush, so I'm gonna come in with some light. But I really want to create this overlap, and the paints are wet. I'm not moving on to the next petal till I get this one how I want, because if the paint dries, it's gonna no longer blend. Reasons I would want the paint to dry were if I messed it up, I want it to dry and I can come back and I can try again. But if I want it to be blendy, I have to do it while it's wet. If the paint starts getting scratchy looking, I need a little bit of water or more paint on my brush. Questions about details so far?
I have a question, but it's about the background. I just finished it.
Yeah,
This is what I got. It's kind of like a red.
ooh, that looks pretty. Hang on, I'm gonna pause this. But I just wasn't paying attention, and I made that like little spike coming off the rose petal, which I don't want. And that's where I'm just gonna come in and I'm gonna extend that petal and kind of smooth it.
Miss Still.
Yes.
So is it this paper? The like
It's like kind of cardboardy. Let me go find you. Yep.
yeah, this is like more of a stronger one.
Yep, and it's really smooth, right?
Yes.
One is bumpy, and that's the watercolor paper.
Okay. And then should I like practice some stuff on this?
I would, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Or, I mean, if you have a different paper at home you want to practice on, there's really no. But I wanted you to have somebody donated that canvas paper. Actually, Miss Merchant. I don't know if any of you have her.
I have her.
Yeah.
She's one of my ELA teachers.
Yeah. So she had a friend of hers worked for an art company and gave her all this stuff, so she donated it. So I thought it'd kind of be nice to paint on something a little nicer than paper. The other thing I didn't talk about was I had you guys take a big brush and a small brush. And my at-home learners, Karina, I think I didn't choose a small brush because I figured you had them because I knew you. Anna, I felt the same way. Actually, you grabbed yours in person. So if you need a small brush, let me know if I didn't get you one. When I put out the supplies to grab them here, I said take it if you need it. But part of it is the right amount of paint, and the other part of it is the right brush for the right job. Because if you use a really big brush for a really small job, all you're going to do is get a giant mess.
I have enough brushes.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah.
I'm a brush hoarder. I love having lots of brushes. And I also don't like sharing my good brushes. Right? Because one thing that people do is they push the brush. If you push the brush, that's what makes the bristles go all wacky crazy. Or if you smash the brush, it makes the bristles not nice. Sometimes you can kind of repair them, but yeah, I'm definitely. And it's important that you store your brushes nicely. It's actually best to store your brushes laying down. And if you can't store them laying down because that takes more room, you want to go bristles up towards the ceiling.
मैंने ज़्यादा पर्पल नीचे रखा कैसे दिख रहा है
Now, is anyone working on some detail painting that they need some tips on or something specific?
अपना यूज़ कर रही हूँ because I was out of canvas paper. Yes, but उसने एक दिया था ना सबको. She's like you can use regular paper, but I'm giving you this for your first time. So yeah.
Miss Sue.
Yes, dear.
I'm going to draw a rose like this, but I'm still doing it. But I'm going to draw like a rose, kind of like it has more like petals in it.
Okay. Yeah, I drew mine really quickly, and I did not make as many of the small petals. But I just think if you guys over winter break, I know we're not at winter break. This day feels so weird because it kind of feels like we were getting off for winter break, even though we're getting off for another week by the end of school. I think painting is so relaxing. And if it's stressing you out because you're trying to get some kind of perfect detail, try just blending colors. Like just make a painting about color. And it's so good for your mental health and to relax. Like I find, like right now, I'm so peaceful. It's just the joy of sitting and making art. And then if you want, there is canvas pads you can buy at like Michael's or Hobby Lobby. Occasionally, you can find mini canvases for sale at the dollar store.
Or you can just order it off of Amazon.
You can. But I would recommend getting some kind of heavy, like cardstock paper, which is what I'm painting on now, and practice lots of things before you commit it to a canvas. Experiment with different techniques. And you know, it was funny, last winter break I was visiting with my sister and her kids, and we did a Bob Ross painting night, and they all got so stressed, her kids did, because it's way harder to do it, and we kept stopping the video, and they got really frustrated because they had this vision of what it should look like, right? And they stopped focusing on the enjoyment of the painting and just experimenting with color. My son never likes to paint with me because he always compares his work to mine. And I always try to tell him that I went to college for art and I'm a lot older, so I've been making art for longer. So I would hope my art looked, you know, came easier, but.
Yeah, okay.
Next week, we're going to work on the watercolor paper with the watercolor paints. So the rest of these acrylic paints, you're welcome to use as you please. Make, you know, a holiday card for someone, make a birthday card, just practice blending colors. You know, just enjoy it and just try things. You know, and try it more than once. If you sit down one day and you try to make a painting and you don't like how it turns out, you know, don't give up. Maybe take a break and step away from it and come back the next day with fresh eyes. See, what I'm doing is I'm avoiding the center part that I didn't draw because I don't know how I'm going to fix it. Because I didn't actually make the petals. So I'm drawing the ones that I know. But we've got about 6 more minutes. Does anyone want to share their work? All right, so this is about how to do stars. So I'm going to show you on my sunset one. And Tammy, yours work too. There's nothing wrong. So I usually use a toothbrush. I'm going to use this because the brush is pretty stiff. So it's like an old toothbrush. I have art toothbrushes. I don't use my toothbrush and then wash it and then brush my teeth with it. I take a little bit of water and I blend it in and I water down the paint a little bit because if it's really thick, it's not going to splatter as well. So you want to make it a little bit more liquidy first. So this is pretty good. Like it's not like soup, but it's kind of, I don't know if you can even see that, but it's a lot thinner. So then I hold the brush vertical and I run my finger. I'm going to see if I can do this so you guys can see. And I just take my finger and I run it along the bristles. So I'm not actually flinging the brush. I'm just running my fingers along the bristles. And it works a little bit better with a toothbrush, but it makes really delicate stars. So that's that trick. But I really prefer to do it with a toothbrush. So the thing with clouds is that you want to do it when the sky's still damp, not soaking wet, because you want it to kind of blend, because clouds reflect whatever color's in the sky. So sunset clouds aren't just white, they have the color of the sky. Daytime clouds reflect a little bit of that. So I would take my brush and with some water on it, I would pick up a little bit of my white, and you're starting and you're just kind of really coming in with some soft marks and you're fading it down into there. So you want the brighter white typically at the top of the clouds. Very rarely is it the opposite. And you want them to look fluffy. Sometimes, depending on how wet your paint is, you almost end up more dabbing the side of the paint so that it still stays fluffy. And you're starting to create your shapes. What you want to do, and I didn't do, I made up these cloud shapes from my brain instead of looking at clouds. And sometimes they start looking kind of weird shape, but generally with clouds, they kind of nest together and they have different shapes. So I think it's really useful to look at clouds kind of before. And I guess it's actually kind of working on the dry paint because it's just, I'm going really soft with very little paint on my brush, Jenna. And the white eventually starts to fade off and it fades into the other colors. So you start at kind of the ridge of your cloud. And actually, I would probably do this with a slightly smaller brush in my case, just so you get a better curve. And then sometimes there's different layers, you know, like you'll get another little big white puff here. I don't know. So that's clouds.